Welcome everyone. Well, it's been a while since I've done a video. Today's video is going to be on statistical fallacies, crisis management, and another new world order. I've been asked by people to do a video on what's going on right now, what are my thoughts and solutions to the situation that we're going through. March 30th, 2020 is the date today. And I did a video over a week ago, but I knew things were going to be changing, so I actually didn't upload it. It's an hour and a half video that is never going to go anywhere. I'm going to do it over again, but I'm going to be including another video at the end of this video. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Well, actually, I'll mention it. It's by Thomas Cohen, and it's just been done just the other day. Dr. Thomas Cohen, and I do have his book here that we're going to talk about, this latest book, Cancer and the New Biology of Water. And he's got several other books. And he's from the Nourishing Traditions book as well. So what we want to look at is what's going on, the statistical fallacies that are being used to distort what's going on from whatever your perspective, whether you believe one theory or another. I think we can all agree that statistical fallacies are being used. I have a couple examples that I'm going to show here that are included. Actually, I'll only mention it because I can't quote too many things here. There's too much to go over. But I want to talk about also crisis management. I've studied emergency response, and I have a brother who is a first responder, and I want to talk about that, just to table some things and give you a homework assignment here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the end result of this whole thing is what I also wanted to really make a video on. So I'm going to be kind of covering a couple of different major themes here and a bunch of minor themes. And the end result is the question of not what's just happening right now, what's happening on a broader scale, what's happening this year, and how is the world changing. We're going into a new world order. Now, this has been used over and over again, a new world order, but it's something that's happened over and over in history. We had a new world order really after the fall. Well, I guess in the new world when it was created. The fall of man, there was a new world that was drastically different after that. After the flood, there was a huge change. Then there was various empires that were started. Nimrod kind of kingdom that started a whole world order in the way of sort of an antichrist system, which led to all these different religions that we see throughout history, coming from that tradition of Nimrod's and all the stories and legends about him. And then we had the Roman Empire, which created kind of a new world order where we had all sorts of roads and connecting people together. And then various things happened, of course, I could get into through history, but that's not my point of this video. Just to talk about the Industrial Revolution and in the New World with the printing press, there was various times where we just had a completely big change take place all at once or rapidly, and it was hard to think about what it was like before that happened. And I saw this in my lifetime with the internet and 9/11 20 years ago, really create this new world order as people. I mean, we had a financial new order, 100 years ago with this fiat currency and all this stuff. That's not my objective to get into that, even though it's a very important point. But when we saw this terminology, New World Order, besides the New World coming to America, 400 or 500 years ago, we had this New World Order within conspiracy theorist language, which was quoted from George Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush president, when he said this, famous statement that we're looking for a new world order. And his son then brought in this new world order, supposedly, and with the whole 9/11 change. And what happened was, after 9/11, we had a different way of looking at the world. And that lasted for a good 10 years. And we're going to see the same thing now, but this is this is 1,000 times more that we're going to be going through. And it's not just what we're going through right now. What I want to talk about is the end result of these changes that are coming. And the introduction of the internet, which was developed way back, planned for what we have today already back in the 50s around, to get to the place where we're at today, where my concern is that we're going to be in a cyborg culture. And this is where we're going to be immersed in a total virtual reality kind of experience, where we're constantly 24/7 in a state of online experience in one way or another. And so I want to touch on that in this video. But that's the new world that we're going to come out of this whole virus thing, if we ever do. Just like 9/11 and all the new normal after that, it lasted for a long time, and it still lasts today, the effects that happened in 9/11. But this is a worldwide thing. People are looking at it merely in the point of view of a pandemic, but this is far greater than any supposed pandemic, the consequences of what's happening. And I'm not even just talking about financial here. I'm talking about technologically. What we're going through is extremely uncharted territory. It's beyond words. It'd take me months to cover all the details of what's going on. But I just wrote down a brief list the other day as I was presenting this to some people. So right now we're living in a change. We're going through a change right now, and this is the end result that I'm concerned about. And I'm going to talk about the statistical fallacies in a minute. We'll get into Thomas Cohen's video this video will end with. And but I want to talk about briefly, we're in a culture that is changing now to be completely dependent upon the internet. And I said this before, well, maybe not in video, that I noticed that the census this year forces everyone to go online. It's a minor thing, but it's a taste of what is coming, where you can't operate normally anymore without being online. So it's been an option for people up to this point. But what do we have? So right now our experience is we have personal computers, laptop, desktops, where we can search the internet, right? We can have our business computers, we can order inventory, we can communicate with people in various ways. We have smartphones where we're doing, again, internet, we are doing social media, and the apps. And the apps are going to be endless. There are already who knows how many apps out there. Then we have the smart meters coming in. These are all ways I'm talking about where we're online one way or another. And so far it's been optional. We could still get away with cash, and we could still get away with being offline. It's becoming more and more difficult to do that, though. And what I see at the end of this, before I want to interject, the end of this is two societies. There's going to be an online society and those who are off-grid. And there's going to be a vast difference between the two. Right now, they can overlap each other, and no big deal. But now we have a new categorization between people that are online and those who are offline. And I'm not saying necessarily they're completely offline, but they're not living, they've opted out as much as they can possibly do, because legally it may not be even possible to be totally offline. And that's a pretty concerning thing. You should be thinking about this right now more than anything else, because it has very, very serious health implications. It will harm you. It has been harming you already, and it will harm you as things get worse. So we have smart meters. Of course, I'm not going to go into all the dangers and problems of all this technology. That's another time. Others have done that, but just going over the basics. We've got personal computers, business computers, smartphones. We've got smart meters, and then we've got the whole Internet of Things experience with all the particular apps, and this is where we're going to be immersed in, like I call it, a cyborg experience. We don't have to have metal parts that we're directly connected to. This is what is happening, though. In order for us to be, though, in a completely cyborg experience where 360 all around us, up and down, all around us, we're constantly connecting online, and literally our vitals are being monitored, and everything in this whole new Internet of Things experience. I've been studying this quite extensively over the last couple of years from a different angle, looking at the Rectenna technology and teaching on this subject. And now it's kind of come together. Okay, where is this all going in my mind? So Alexa, Google Assistant, and all these different things will become more and more of a reality, in which we'll be connecting to our devices all around, including little products that we buy in the store, showing inventory count. Everything's going to be very efficient, and that's the key word that people are looking for: efficiency. So it's going to sell. And at the end of this whole lockdown that we're going through, people are going to be just jumping at the bit to get this technology. They're going to be so suppressed in a lockdown state that they're just going to overwhelmingly accept all this technology that has been developed a long time ago, but it's rolling out. So it's very attractive. It's very efficient. Having AI manage things for you, calculate things, interpret things for you, do everything for you. So the Wall-E movie is what we're moving towards more and more, where we just don't do anything. Everything's just a matter of stimulation, and we can think a thought and these things actually get done. And that's where we're getting to Neuralink. I can't get into the details of all that, but where we're connecting into the brain, and the brain is stimulated in various ways, and your vitals and everything are monitored. And again, there's a whole bunch that I could get into, but my point is to just say that we're going to be immersed in this whole online existence, which is a very, very, very bad thing, right? So far, the internet's been useful, it's great, whatever, but now things change. Now the nightmares of the science fiction become more and more of a reality. So what do we have in this supposed epidemic? Well, it is an epidemic. It's a yearly epidemic, And we'll get into some of those details in a minute. But what do we have in the midst of this right now? So we have telepresence concept. And this is where I'm saying online always, online everything. We have virtual gatherings. And look at the manipulation from the media as to trying to soothe people, saying, well, you don't have to meet together. You can meet together online, right? So we have virtual gatherings, and including entertainment. People are watching movies somehow or another together with others in a different home through the internet. And as far as I knew, people didn't want to talk while they're watching a movie, but apparently they're having some kind of gatherings. So this is becoming something that's already been available, but it's being used a lot more right now. Teleschool. Everybody knows now that you can't go to school, but you can have online school, which I'm all for homeschooling. That's really the only proper way to school. But the point is, this is not homeschooling in the normal sense, because the kids are just really online and whatever they're exactly doing. But the point is that new technology now is being ratcheted up, and people are becoming used to, again, another dependency upon the internet rather than face-to-face social gatherings and meeting with people, and basically moving people away from the natural life, the natural world, into this digital world that can be easily manipulated, that is manipulated all the time. And then we have telehealth where people now can meet with their doctors, not only meet with the doctors, but they can have the hospital equipment in their homes, and the vitals are being read over the internet. And again, that's all very convenient, and it has appeal, but it's just another sense where we'll become dependent upon the internet. And when things don't go well, then it's a nightmare. That's the problem. It's all great at the beginning, and then it goes really bad. Then we have takeout meals, right? Meals on wheels, and grocery shopping through the internet, where there's another grocery store behind the grocery store in which robots are picking up items, or Amazon is picking out items rather than people, and putting them together. And then robots coming to your door will be a while, but before that happens. But now we're moving toward this automated state. So there's all sorts of things day by day coming out. Not that it's always new technology, but we're being immersed into a new reality, completely new world. So no contact payments related to that. So this is going towards cashless society, digital wallet. These are very significant concerns to pay attention to, because people are not going to be accepting cash, and now it's going to be more and more problematic. Anyway, all this stuff, virtual reality, drones, all these different concepts where, the drones aren't necessarily online, but they can be. And again, those are videos that I could do in themselves on those subjects. But this is the new world, the new culture that we're going to be immersed into through this experience, and afterwards, as we get into this 5G, 4G plus, 4G, 5G experience that will be unlike, it'll be way more than what we've experienced online so far. It's a culture online, a digital reality, which is then again a distorted reality. Again, I could do a whole video on that, and I don't have time to get into any further. But this is the new world order that we're going to be in the next 5 years. I said this before this whole thing happened, that 2020 to 2025 they're going to see more changes in the world in these 5 years than we've seen previous, from the flood all the way up to the worldwide flood all the way up to 2019. The changes that changed throughout the world during that time will probably equal about what we're going to see in these 5 years. And I said that already before this whole thing came about. And so now we have these changes very rapidly progressing in a way that, that I wasn't even expecting. I kind of wondered, I knew that these changes were going to be happening, 1,000-fold changes in the amount of internet usage we're going to be immersed into as individuals. And already, so that happened very quickly, right at the beginning of this year with this whole thing. So they started this whole change already, and they're changing as we go along. So it's not just a new world reality where we are having to deal with this forever quarantine hanging over our heads at any time, or where the whole economy or whole city's economy just stops, non-essentials at least, and worrying about whether you're going to get some kind of illness. That's only part of the picture. That's kind of more of a distraction for the new reality that's coming along. And so when we saw what we saw it with 9/11 is paralleling today. So with 9/11, and this is the book on the subject, Where Did the Towers Go, by Dr. Judy Wood. I mentioned it before. What happened with 9/11 was what we see happening now is very similar in different ways. So there were things happening prior, all sorts of kind of prior knowledge and simulations that, and some of them which went live during 9/11. And we had, for example, the Project for the New American Century, PANAC, which included Cheney, Wolfowitz, Jeb Bush, this think tank. This is old news. I know everybody knows this. Well, most of you know this already, but where a year prior, they called for a new strategy, a strategy for basically making American dominance in the world by really essentially creating a war of terror, or war on terror is what they called it. But the idea was to, at the rate that things were changing, it would take a long time unless there was a, quote, new Pearl Harbor. So what this is right now is a new Pearl Harbor in the same sense. And both of them are located, starting with, at least in America, in New York City, of course, again. But at the same time that the strategy was already laid out by the philosophers and the think tanks, and been worked on to prepare for this and culture an environment in a situation in which allows for this change to take place. So in this case, the same thing happened. I have here a printout of the CDC job searches where dated last year, 11/15/2019, job postings for public health advisor quarantine program. You can look that up. It's still online. Location: Dallas, Texas, Houston, Seattle, Washington, Anchorage, and it goes on and on. And presumably all these will be hotspots, which some of them already are. But looking for people just prior to this experience that we went through. But even more so was Event 201, and you can look that up. There's so much already on that subject. Bill Gates and company hosting a simulation. There you have the table and all the guys are simulating exact same keywords being used to talk about the exact same keywords that are used in the news today. The same people, they even had the Chinese CDC at the table, all these people, and it's like exactly the same. So basically that went live, so to speak, where they had the simulation, and yeah, we have all these articles and all these, not articles, we have all these statements. Oh, if we had only known and been able to be prepared, but yet they were preparing in October of last year. They were talking about these things, and just so happened to happen a month later in China or whatever, maybe at the exact same time this started happening. But my question here is even more than that, as to what really has happened. Has anything really significantly different happened beyond the kind of turning on of the 5G system? But are the numbers any different? And that's what we want to talk about in these statistical fallacies. But the point that I was just making there is that there's prior knowledge, there is manipulation of things, and it's not I don't have the ability to go and try and prove all that. You can study it on your own. You could call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want to for bringing that up, but the point is, looking into event 201 is pretty hard to explain as to how that could have happened, and the exact same keywords being used and so forth. So anyway, we'll move on here. So we're looking at statistical fallacies. Well, actually, what I'll do is this is more important to get into first, crisis management. So I drew up something here the other day, trying to help people, write this out as a homework assignment. So a crisis management, the first thing you have to do is assess the situation. When you come into emergency situation, you have to really determine what is going on. Just like Judy Wood said here, before you start looking for who done it, what actually happened, or what is happening, and deal with that first. So gather the most important information that can be gathered is first on this list. Evaluate what needs to be done immediately, either actively or in avoidance. So in other words, what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, of course. So everybody can agree with these points here. Specify what the crisis is another point here. Distinguish between the public perception of the crisis and the actual crisis, and cover all the details, right? There's a big difference between what people think is happening and what's actually happening. And that's often the case in life, that we often, come into a situation with a narrative, and that will be part of the statistical fallacies I want to get into here, is that we think it is a pandemic, but is there really any difference between this year and last year? That's a big question. But what else is happening? What is the real crisis? So the real crisis is actually much bigger than what people are actually worried about. And that what they think is the crisis isn't really much to worry about. And that's, again, the deception. Project developing crisis changes. So estimate what will happen in the days, weeks, months, and years based upon the stated agendas. Remember I said the Project for a New American Century was basically presenting a case for a new world order. And, these things would happen if we accelerated it by a new event that would, the Pearl Harbor event was that which initiated the American public to basically not only end the war, but get engaged in the war way back. And so the idea is that these kind of major changes happen they're orchestrated to some level, and it's publicly stated. You can find all the quotes, you can find the various lectures, where they pay thousands of dollars a seat to attend, and some of these lectures come online or get quoted, and you see these things come about later on. So everything in the last 100 years that has been a significant change of event has pretty much been openly stated that it was going to happen, and you just got to have an ear to follow that and find that out, and follow the money, but just follow the philosophies that people have. One of the major philosophies is eugenics. They're not using that word anymore. It's not popular after Nazi Germany, but the same players are still at work, like Bill Gates and so many people are trying to reduce the population of the world, and they don't hide that fact. And again, you can see many videos showing that, many documents in another whole video. But so the stated agendas, you can predict pretty much what's coming or what's planned. Maybe not exactly the days or months or whatever, but it's pretty straightforward, the trends that are happening. So again, going now to the solutions to the actual crisis and plan of action, prepping after the fact. This is where we're at. It's too late for most of you. If you haven't started prepping a couple of years ago, you're going to get swallowed up into this, and it's just really too late for you, I'm sorry to say. What I'm calling for is people get out of the cities, as fast as you can, like all cities, even small cities. But really, like what you see on the TV right now, on the news, who's suffering the most right now? Those who are in the cities. When things go bad in the cities, it's the worst place to be. So you want to be ultimately in a place of people that are off-grid, that are natural, that are healthy, that are self-sufficient, people who are living like real people, not this artificial concrete jungle environment that we've come used to and been seduced into. So really, prepping is really trying to live like everyone's lived for thousands of years, local communities, CSAs, and so forth. And this is what Thomas Cohen, has been about for some time, and interesting stuff. I don't agree with everything they believe, but definitely have a lot of good points. So what we need to do is define the fundamentals of life. We have to look at the fundamentals, and we have to develop the related ideas here of what the fundamentals are, and then we have to assess the ability to implement those ideas. How to organize with others is another point, but how do we go from defining the fundamentals to ensuring that we can produce the fundamentals, we can in our local communities, and not be dependent upon government or big industry or the smart existence. How can you create a society that is not dependent whatsoever upon the internet? That is the way I've kind of boiled it down, because until now we could do that and be fine. Now it's going to be quite a bit different to try and do that, but it's very important to get away from the radiation and the dependency upon the internet. So what are some fundamentals? So the goal is to be a minimalist and independent as possible in local communities, and trade with off-grid communities, trade and create methods of doing that. So what are some fundamentals? Food. how to grow, gather, process, distribute real food for all seasons, gather, maintain seeds, properly build greenhouses, you know, to, I was going to say grow meat, raise meat, you know, farming on your fields. So all these things need to be fully developed. You need to have that. That's the most important priority, is your food. Buildings and property, modifying existing buildings once the 5G comes online. Once Elon Musk's satellites come online very shortly, he needs to make another 40 satellites. Next launch, he'll be able to turn on the 5G internet and reach the whole world. And by the end of the year, it's projected he's going to have 1,600 satellites in the air, which he can have pretty high level of 5G coming online. So it's not just city online 5G, it's worldwide that we have to be concerned about. So what we want to do is create buildings that are shielded, true Faraday cages, from all this radiation. Because your body needs to rest. You need to have no radiation on your body, at least while you're sleeping, preferably all the time. But if you never get rest from it, you're developing serious problems, especially if you can't ever rest from it. So again, that's a big subject that I'll be getting into. I don't have the name of the book on me that I'll want to mention later on, but it's at the end. It's in the video at the end of this video here, which Thomas Cohen brings out. He's mentioning 4 things that you can look at. All right, so we need energy, fuel, wood, diesel, gas, LP, hydrogen, ammonia. These are things that I am, getting into as fuels. Obviously, I'm involved in electric, free energy systems, solar, geothermal. These are, you have to deal with the energy, but in this case, the energy is not as important as these other priorities: food and property, buildings, trade, or actually some considerations with the energy is your parts and your supply considerations, figuring out where you're going to get things, how your local communities can make almost everything that you need, and hopefully everything. Depends on how minimalist you are. So trade and business, non-digital currency used, bartering, lending, how are you going to deal with that? How creating a liaison or indirect connection to the grid world system to make necessary payments or transactions. If you're going offline, you got to pay your taxes, you got to do different things. How are you going to organize that? Those are all things that you got to think through. Security is a big problem. And I list here, protection from radiation is a form of security, health security. Vaccines is going to be the big issue coming out of this whole thing. How to get not partake in those vaccines. And the vaccines, Bill Gates has just published or spoken recently about including tracking in the vaccines, so that you've got your vaccines. And first it starts off with, if you get your vaccines, you get these benefits that go along with it, and then perhaps it could get to the point where you have forced vaccinations. In some places it will be that way. In this country, there'll be half of Americans will be like, over my dead body, because that's the way people are in this country. So loss of liberties is another thing that's happening right now. We have GM being forced to manufacture, being controlled by the government with these war power acts, and all sorts of suspensions of liberties have been happening. In fact, all liberties have been suspended under the emergency declarations. Anything is possible, and there's no accountability for it whatsoever. Not to create worry to people. Some of you will be worried. As Christians, we're never to be worried. We're to trust the Lord and live by faith. But the point is that we need to be prudent. And this is why I'm bringing this out. And we need to consider the future. Jesus did say, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, basically head for the hills, right? He didn't say, "Oh, go and pray for a miracle and then it will be all over." He told them, this is coming, and when you see this happening, be prudent, and have your oil ready to go. Don't be like the foolish women that were not prepared, right? So we need to be prepared without hoarding. Hoarding is being distorted too in people's minds of what that really means. Communication, information, how to do phones without wireless. And that's another whole subject matter to get into. So that's a little bit of just an outline that I came up with, crisis management. And, but like here's an example. I just grabbed a bunch of things really quickly here. So this was from last night. Rhode Island police go door to door and hunt for New Yorkers seeking safety from the virus. And literally the Army, the National Guard, they say in here, is backing them up. National Guard members have also been posted at Rhode Island Airport, train station, bus stops to grill travelers. The penalty for not complying with the state's quarantine order is a fine up to $500 and 90 days in prison. So this is pretty serious. What's happening right now is they went from social scorning of people for, gathering in churches or gathering together at all, to now right out ridicule and saying that you're causing people to die and getting everybody worked up, into a frenzy, and to now the point where you're considered almost like, we're going to be seeing this hyped up, especially these next 2 weeks here, where they said the death rate is going to keep going up and peaking till around Easter, and then in the U.S., and then it will come down at least maybe in the first wave, as what they call it. But they're getting everybody hyped up, and now it's basically somebody who has the virus is, if they even have it, or if there is even such a thing, they are being looked at as a terrorist. This is the kind of hype that they've created since 9/11 about this terrorist. And now suddenly anybody who has this, and they're not self-quarantined, they are, they're as bad as a terrorist. I mean, this is the way it's moving towards, in that kind of language, so that they're hunting these people down. I mean, this is really unbelievable what's happening, considering this next point. Well, before I get in again to the statistical fallacies, just a couple more points here. So considering the fact that 5G is definitely integrally related to this, all the hotspots that we see have direct. You could be calling this a fallacy in your mind, but the areas that are affected, especially where it supposedly started in Wuhan, where they turn on the 5G. But in New York City, I have an article here which is just these last couple of months here, they just turned on 5G. So this is just part of the article here. While 5G is still in the early days of its development, now that Verizon has flipped the switch on its 5G network in New York City, alongside activating 5G in Boise, Idaho, Panama City, Florida, blah, blah, blah. And there's 21 other cities, including New York City here, that has the 5G. And also the 4G plus and all that is also very, equally bad and powerful. So what you have is all these things coming online, and they are creating very similar symptoms with the electromagnetic radiation. And then the point is in this, that you'll see at the latter part of this video, is when you have metal particulates in your body, they form antennas. And so what happens is your body develops all sorts of problems, and of course respiratory problems with the 60 gigahertz frequency is another whole thing. I don't really have the time to get into, but this creates the very same kind of dry cough symptoms that people are having. And so there's a very clear connection there. But the point that one of the bottom line points of this is that we have no proof for any of the numbers that are being said, that we have a direct connection to what a cause and effect relationship or justification for any of the claims. What we have is absolute contradiction, chaos, and no sense of science whatsoever in this whole mess. But we have hype, and there's no way for 99.9% of the population or more to be able to verify any of these claims that are being made. And that's a very dangerous position to be in, to be completely dependent upon these numbers that are being stated, with the massive repercussions following these claims. So never in the history of the world has something so dramatically happened based upon something that is completely unverifiable. The whole world has had to swallow this and trust completely everything that's being said. But yet, when you actually dissect everything that's being said, it's contradictory. And this is what I want to get into here, is one of the main subjects of this video, is statistical fallacies. One more point here that I forgot to mention. U.S. government tech, so March 17th here, U.S. government tech industry discussing ways to harness location data to combat coronavirus. And so this was the merging, again, of government and big business like never before. And again, this was all considered really bad in Nazi Germany in our history books, and yet here we have this kind of thing happening in the merging of industry and government. And I want to say a side point here is that one of the big things that's taking place here is the stealing of the small businesses. So people are talking about, being out of work. Well, the real thing that's going on here is the theft of small businesses. So the idea of everybody becoming part of the big city online environment to be basically an assembly line type of person who doesn't think, who just does, and in 5 years, robots will take your place anyway in that assembly line. But the idea is, I remember I had a landlord about 6 years ago who told me, I was living on a farm, and the guy told me, he said, back in the 50s, because it was a milk farm, and he says, these big companies came through here and they undersold all of us and put us out of business because people didn't support the local community and they just wanted for the cheap price. And so what happened was they shut down their businesses because they couldn't compete, and then the prices went back up to what they were before. And this is kind of the Walmart experience, taking over the mom and pop shops. And the same thing is happening right now, where people are going to be put out of work and these big companies who have already had prior knowledge to this were able to sell off their stock, make a lot of money by selling it. Stock goes down, and then they can essentially, one way or another, come out a lot better off. I mean, it may not be as clear-cut as the bailouts were some years ago, but the point is that in the end, the small businesses, no matter what, are going to have a more and more hard time to compete with the competition that is, AI controlled and directed and so big that the small business can't compete with the big ones. And so this is just a whole way of just moving towards socialism, the whole thing that everybody's supposed to be against on the one side. They've just jumped right into it by this whole situation. So anyway, in this case, not only is it a big, this article is not really about that so much as I just went off on a tangent there, but the point of this article is that they're going to be tracking people right now. Okay, so here's the article that applies to this, or the news article that came out, that these spring breakers down in Florida, they went off and somehow or another they tracked where these people went, and they claimed, without showing how they claimed that what supported this conclusion was that everywhere they went, they spread all this virus around, and it was just unbelievable, the statements that were made without any support. But it's implying what's stated right here, that people are being actually tracked right now against the law allowing them to track people and finding out who they were, where they went, and then supposedly figuring out somehow or another that they actually spread a virus. I mean, it's unbelievable, the assumptions that are made in there, but the omission is what I'm pointing out here, that they're already working together, monitoring everybody. That's of course very concerning, as someone like Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul has brought out very much concerns about. But what I'm getting at is the connection here. Everything is centralized. So the currency, the digital currency, is the blockchain, Bitcoin kind of phenomena coming together, but centralized. It was, decentralized, but now centralized. So everything becoming centralized through AI and, just a grand dictatorship, but at worldwide scale here. And so there's nothing that can compare to the biblical concept of the beast system than this. I mean, when I was growing up, I heard all the conspiracy theorists, and remember I watched the Terminator movies and the whole Skynet. Well, there's actually a Skyworks company that's exactly like Skynet right now, and we thought, well, whatever, things will get bad in the future, no doubt, but we didn't realize to what extent when we were kids growing up thinking about these things. And of course, even the thoughts that we had, like, if you were in the 30s and 1984 book came out, people would have thought, oh yeah, right. But we've far surpassed 1984 in our day already. And we do have that, the truth ministry, right? Every day now at 11 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we get the truth ministry coming on, and there's a war, and it's imaginary war. And there's a moment of hate. We're going to hate the enemy, and so it's all those parallels. Of course, you've heard those for years. I don't need to repeat. So anyway, it's pretty crazy. Things are happening by the day, and it doesn't appear that we'll ever get over it, because now they've got this thing working. Now they can, like right after 9/11, we just saw the keywords cycled over and over again, and it's riveted into people's experience, so they can just keep hammering on these things for years to come. But what's it based upon? So what it is many big statistical fallacies. So what I found, I have to do a video on statistical fallacies better than I'm doing right now, because this video is not so much getting into the nitty-gritty of statistical fallacies as I'd like to, as much as showing information and just mentioning statistical fallacies here. So what I've talked about fallacies in the past, informal fallacies, and essentially a fallacy is a mistake, either intentional or accidental. It's a mistake in the way we think about something, and it largely has to do with the narrative that we're going into, the assumptions that we're making. So it's an error of judgment rather than mere form of the argument, which would be formal fallacies. So what you have here in statistical fallacies, so you have some like 25 different fallacies in general, and then you can kind of go off into very subsets of those fallacies, and you could have, maybe 200, kinds of fallacies, but generally it's about 25, and they all kind of overlap each other in various ways. The statistical fallacies that people use actually incorporate almost every fallacy in their exercise. So it's basically a numbers trick. And most of these fallacies that are used are intentionally misleading. So they're deliberate lies on purpose. And of course, we can get into these with the pharmaceutical industry and being called out of them. But the idea of using these fallacies is because most people are not trained to think logically. And our whole culture is brought up all over the world. There's only a few kinds of groups of people, and generally homeschoolers tend to be more well-trained in logical thinking. But really, we're taught in the regular schools what to think and who to believe and to memorize. We're not taught to, and we're taught to also at the same time believe what we want to believe. So those are seemingly opposites, but that's what we're trained. We're not trained to evaluate what is truth. We're not taught to be philosophers and get into the essence of truth and to question what we are taught and evaluate it and look at the evidence. We're taught what the evidence is. We're given the answers in essence and taught to memorize them. And if you want to pass, if you want to make it in this world, you memorize those things and you don't contradict the establishment. So that is making perfect slaves out of people. And so therefore, the general population, as long as they can get 80% of the people believing something, then they don't care about the 20% that can think, because people don't have time to think. Maybe they have some time right now. If they're not watching just movies. They can think, and hopefully this will stir some people to think. So statistical fallacies is just assuming people don't bother with caring about considering the narrative that you come into looking at numbers with. I've got a couple of things here that I just pulled out. Again, not in any particular order. At one point, if I forget to mention this when we get into this, is that one part of this whole subject on the statistical fallacies here is that Okay, so people have symptoms of low-grade fever, dry cough, and so the assumption is anybody who has that has the virus, right? And yet the same symptoms can be someone with asthma, bronchitis, or someone suffering from air pollution, which I didn't know this until today, actually, that supposedly in northern Italy, they had very high or very bad air pollution. I knew that they had that, of course, in Wuhan. And that would definitely add to respiratory problems already prior to this. But we want to look at the fallacies. That's part of this whole concept of looking at the fallacies is if you just simply go into this saying these people that we consider having the coronavirus, therefore we've determined that they have it without actually, there is no suitable test according to their premises. And I'll get into that in Koch's postulates. So let me just briefly say that right now. So COCH postulates, so you can look this up and see that is listing 4 requirements to discern, to make a proper analysis that this virus is really causing. Okay, in order to determine all the numbers that you see on the Johns Hopkins world map, for that to be actually accurate, which is completely inaccurate in many different ways, and the statistical fallacies, I'll be bringing that out here, why those are wrong numbers. They're completely arbitrary, useless numbers. They don't help us whatsoever, even by their own admission that they're saying this. So you can take their own words and show how they completely contradict themselves in these numbers. Well, when we look at the criteria, in order to make that determination, would have to fulfill 4 requirements, which are not being made. So these are the following. The microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease. All organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. Premise 2. The microorganism must be isolated from the diseased organism and grown in a pure culture. So there's 4 different requirements for them to make this determination, which admittedly they have not done that. Now I did a quick search and I found people inferring that they had done that. But in this one article, oh yeah, I have it right here. Here's one that actually admits that they didn't do it. Now this is a while back. It seems like a year ago, but it's January 24th. Received January 21. Return of the coronavirus 2019-N Cove by Lisa Grelinski. Anyway, the abstract. The emergence of the novel coronavirus has awakened the echoes of SARS-CoV from nearly two decades ago. Yet with the technological advances and important lessons gained from previous outbreaks, perhaps the world is better equipped to deal with the most recent emergence of 2B coronavirus. Now, maybe Event 201 was actually a preparation for this. You know, of course, everybody wants to forget about that happened, and that's why I already covered that. So I'm just going to quote a couple of points here. Point 1, emergence. Coronavirus is the third of the century, emerged from in December 2019 with a cluster of patients with connections to Hunan, South China seafood market in Wuhan, China. Similarly to severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, which is SARS, and Middle East syndrome infections. Patients exhibited symptoms of viral pneumonia, including fever, difficult breathing, and bilateral lung infiltration in the most severe cases. Now, point 5, achieving Koch's postulates. All right, this is very important. Traditional identification of a microbe as the causative agent of disease requires fulfillment of Koch's postulates. These 4 points they mentioned. Modified by Rivers for viral diseases. Whatever. At the present time, the 2019 nCoV has been isolated from patients, detected by specific assays in patients, and cultured in host cells. One available sequence is identified as a passage isolate. Starting to fulfill these criteria, they're starting to, right? Remember that, it's starting to fulfill these criteria. They haven't fulfilled even the first point. They really haven't at all. Because really the first point is really in the context of the other points. Because you can find, well, I'll let the last part of this video explain it because I'm not the doctor like Thomas Cohen is. Anyway, he goes over this more, but I just wanted to read this one reference here because this is one of the only places where they kind of admit this. Given the recentness of 2019 nCoV outbreak, at this point there is no animal model available to fulfill the remaining criteria. And then list 1, testing the capability of this to cause respiratory disease in a related species. 2, re-isolating the virus from experimentally infected animal. And 3, detection of a specific immune response. These efforts will surely be an area of intense research in the upcoming months, both in China and in COV research laboratories around the world. Now, I ended it there. You know, obviously there's a whole lot more. But notice that the requirements haven't been made, and yet they've concluded this. They've already concluded that they have something. Just because they have symptoms, and then of course they have these tests. But what are these tests based upon? That's what you'll hear about in the later part of this video. But my point is to point out that they don't even fulfill their own criteria, and they're committing all sorts of fallacies, which not only statistical fallacies, but other tricks that they're pulling, as they've been doing for years. Okay, so again, essentially they had statistics that they were going by, or it's not statistics, they had symptoms that they were going by to determine, and they don't give any ability to show the public proof at all, or even evidence, for that matter, that there's any basis for their numbers. Now, I will say this before, if I don't get it into these specific examples of fallacies, is that they contradict themselves. There was an article that I just read a couple hours ago. It just came out this afternoon. We were on noon. And it said that in China, their numbers, nobody believes their numbers. But here's the problem with that. The way they're telling you day after day what they believe and the decisions that they're making are based upon the information coming from China. And so how's that possible that they can make determinations and now saying, well, those numbers are obviously faked? And who's to say the numbers here aren't obviously faked? Are we really talking about people that are substantially different? You know, this whole perception of China being so much different than what we have here is unjustified. I'm not saying that China isn't engaged in all sorts of, you know, things. I agree. But who's to say that's not happening here? And that's, again, another subject. But the point is that their numbers were based upon the Chinese government's numbers and all that information. And now we hear, oh, well, you know, that is obviously wrong. Because we look at the numbers here, now we've already passed them, and we're on the verge of double the numbers in the United States alone. And so it doesn't kind of make sense, the population and all these things. And of course the article was going on about how all these people were being cremated in way more numbers than they were, even still today, when it's supposedly stopped in China already, and they're bringing all this up. But the point that I'm bringing up is, even by their own admission, by bringing this up, that the numbers are faked, it brings to the public's attention, well, how do we evaluate our own situation? Why are we supposedly telling the truth over here? What evidence do we have of that these being truthful statements, when their statements contradict each other from day to day, and pretty outrageously? So, like I said, the numbers are based upon what China said, but now they're not. You know what? You can't have it both ways. And then, of course, the reports in that article were that they were faking the numbers of deaths that people were. Well, maybe this is a different article, that they were including natural deaths in with that. How do we know that somebody who doesn't just have the flu and have other pneumonia problems get lumped in with these numbers, which are still very, very low, as they've admitted? It was a bad flu season. And so on the one hand, they'll admit things like, really, the numbers are the same as the flu. So really, what makes this unique? What I see is what makes this unique is the turning on of the 5G with the present pollution and problems that we have, creating a perfect scapegoat. So in other words, redirecting the world's attention away from the fact that the 5G is very, very bad, and getting us used to it. And then we have the scapegoat. We have the new Bin Laden, devil behind every tree. Oh, there he is, there he is, there he is. Every time someone gets sick, oh, it's, you know, say they're suffering from, you know, the 60 gigahertz affecting their oxygen absorption, and, oh, well, you just got the coronavirus. Oh, okay, now I get it. And meanwhile, this numerous body of scientific body of experts have warned against this problems of this radiation for years, for decades, for almost 100 years, since radio has been part of our culture, have been warning about the dangers of radio frequency radiation. But no, even though they're the majority of experts, they're going to go ahead with it anyway. And so again, you have the situation where people have another way of looking at it. You're changing the narrative. So without this coronavirus, if people just started getting sick and you could identify it with 5G areas, then people would be, no, we don't want this, you know. But now we have this massive deception going on worldwide and making people not be able to figure that out anymore. The less likely to. And so every time there's an increase of that, it's just more coronavirus. And now we need more vaccinations to solve this, which never end up solving anything really in the end. So let's go on with some different fallacies that have to do with statistics. So ad populum, argumentum ad populum, it's popular. So this is a popular, or you could say majority of beliefs, a kind of democracy argument. It's true because of who says it, or how popular it is, or how many people believe it. These are all related kind of fallacies. But Mom, everybody's doing it. Everybody believes it. Come on, Charlie. Everybody believes that. Who do you think you are? And so the idea is that all the governments have agreed, so therefore it's true. This is gospel truth, even though they haven't even fulfilled those requirements, admittedly, to be able to determine those things. Unbelievable. So popularity arguments, which then lead to ad baculum arguments, which is do this or I'll beat you up. So shaming people for not going along with what the public believes. You can't have an independent belief anymore. You have to go with the flow, even when you have no evidence for it. How can you, as an individual, believe something without evidence? Now, people telling you that is true is not really credible evidence. I don't consider it evidence, especially when these people contradict themselves about their claims. Therefore, they invalidate their evidence completely. There's no evidence there. There's no reason to believe it. But you cannot believe anything honestly without having the ability to verify it. And we've just been very rapidly shoved this down our throats, unbelievably fast. And this contradicts what we see year after year. Every year it's a pandemic. Every year the hospitals are overrun. They don't have enough equipment. I've had people working in the industry tell me that. They're like, so far, Rick, I don't see really anything different except for the hype. And of course, people are worked up more than ever, so they're going to have more stress and have more symptoms, have more bad responses because of their stress levels and their fear. And then, of course, you see more into something too. So all that mayhem adds to it. So anyway, ad populum, going off on that a little bit. Lying with statistics. The contemporary fallacy of misusing true figures and numbers to prove unrelated claims. A corrupted argument from Logos. This is just, I'm quoting this from somewhere. I'm not even sure what the website was, but often preying on the public's perceived or actual mathematical ignorance, right? Statistics, they're not quite aware of, the way numbers are properly used. And of course, often said in a way that's overwhelmed with information, and so you don't have time to look specifically at the actual claim that's being made. So you got overwhelmed with, well, this is what he's going to get into here, I think. Oh no, that's a different point. The next point after this. Okay, so this includes the tiny percentage fallacy that an amount or action is quite significant in and of itself, somehow becomes insignificant simply because it's a tiny percentage of something much larger. Okay, it's actually, what we're talking about is the opposite of this. But anyway, under the same fallacy, a consumer who would choke on spending an extra $1 for 2 cans of peas will typically ignore $50 on the price of a car or $1,000 extra on the total price of a house, simply because these differences are only a tiny percentage of the much larger amount being spent. Historically, sales tax or value-added tax have successfully gained public acceptance and remain under the radar because of this latter fallacy, even though amounting to hundreds or thousands of dollars a year in extra tax burden. So here's a couple examples. One is the bailouts that just went, the $2 trillion and more coming, that just happened. But, the other one I had an example of, when the phone companies did this some years ago, where they would sneak in a couple of pennies or whatever on the end of your bill, overcharge you, and you have to spend an hour telling them that there's something wrong here on the bill, and sure, you get that 5 cents knocked off after an hour of your time. So you don't bother with the waste of time there, and you just lose that money, and you do that a million times, you've made some money. So there's all sorts of ways that this kind of happens that we're used to seeing this. But with the other example is where we have all this pork spending in this bill, all this extra money being allocated out when there's no place for it. I mean, there's maybe no place for the whole thing in itself, but adding all these extra little things into it is part of this kind of fallacy, if you will. Okay, the snow job. Information bias, verbosum, so forth. A fallacy proving a claim by overwhelming the audience, snowing them under, with mountains of true but marginally relevant documents, graphs, words, facts, numbers, information, and statistics that look extremely impressive, but which the intended audience cannot be expected to understand or properly evaluate. This is, so that's what's going on here. All these numbers, and you're just supposed to trust it because they're the experts. That's the bottom line of the fallacy is, we're the experts, you just believe what we say. Even though if you're not even understanding the technical language, you can see from day to day how they completely contradict themselves in their admissions. And then they'll actually say, well, these numbers really don't represent what's going on anyway. So really, what's the point of them? That's the point you have to realize, is that they're fake numbers. They're not really corresponding to anything, actually. Because here's an example, and we'll get into this right away here. When you have, think about it, the flu, the cold, how do they know really what percentage of people really have this? There's no possible way. There are so many people who get some symptoms, and do they really have, what do they exactly have? No one will ever know. No one will ever know that they actually had it. There's no way to estimate how many millions or thousands of people have any of these things. They're only going by those who go to the hospital or talk to their doctors, and then they're only guessing about, most of the time, because they don't necessarily test somebody to know. And then again, their testing is what we'll see in the latter part of this video, is also fallacious. Because, again, depending on how you test, you can prove whatever you want to prove in it to some degree. So really, that's kind of a more technical thing to specify. I just made a general statement there that's kind of hard to expand upon, but you'll hear that in the latter part of this video here. So, but anyway, the point is the numbers. Okay, so we got this 0.1% of people who have the flu compared to what we have now? Well, admittedly, right now, all we have is people that are supposedly getting a test, which tests where all these false positives and false negatives and what have you. Then you have, so bad tests, tests based upon what? What do we really know about these tests? And how do we know for sure that what's being tested is actually being reported? We have no way. They're not going to show us under a microscope under the. We're not going to go there and watch them do the test and be able to verify every part of it to know whether it's true or not. I mean, these things, everybody can be bought off and paid for in our culture, in our day now anyway, so you can't really trust what's happening because there's so much money being made by the outcome of all this, right? That's the point, is there's very high motives, very strong motives to determine these things. But even without getting into motives, all you have is the number of people who have been tested, and then you make these conclusions like we've got a 2% rate now, I guess is the latest. 2% based upon what? They said the vast majority of people probably don't even show symptoms. So what is that based on? Based on what? The few people like Rand Paul who were tested didn't show any symptoms? But they're telling everybody not to get tested unless they have the symptoms. So how can you make this big sweeping statement? 2% of the people who have been tested. Okay, well that doesn't tell us anything different than the flu. In the flu, how do we know it's 0.1? About what? 0.1 of all the people who have been tested or who we assume have it? I mean, this is this wide open door. It's absolutely absurd. We have no clue, even given all their presuppositions of whether these things can be accurately isolated and whether they're really fulfilling those four requirements or not is just another whole thing. But even given their numbers and their emissions, it doesn't follow. It's the most ludicrous example of statistical fallacies that you ever will come across. So that was, the main point here. But I found just an article from 2007 from India, an Indian journal, and I'll put a link up on the website. Not that it's an important article in itself, but it just gives you some of these examples here. He lays out. So statistical fallacies. So background, a large number of statistical fallacies occur in medical research literature. So medical research literature is not gospel truth. It is admittedly filled with statistical fallacies. Why? Because of motivations. Not these people, well, a lot of these people don't have logical sense, for one, but they deliberately cook the numbers. These are mostly inadvertent and occur due to lack of understanding of statistical concepts and terminologies. Many researchers do not fully appreciate the consequence of such fallacies on the credibility of their report. I would beg to differ. I would say that people just don't care, because they're interested in coming to their conclusions and getting famous or whatever, getting grants. Statistical fallacies occur due to inadequate the sampling that is used for generalized conclusion, incompatible groups presented as compatible, mixing of two or more distinct groups that in fact require separate consideration, misuse of the percentages, means, and graphs, incomplete reporting of that suppresses facts, ignoring reality and depending instead on oversimplification, forgetting baseline values that affect the outcome, misuse of computer packages or use of black box approach, misuse of p-values that compromises conclusions, confusing correlation with cause effect, interpreting statistical significance as medical significance. So this is an article about all these fallacies that are commonly experienced in the journals. And here we're having these very people who are committing these fallacies, like notoriously, determining the guidelines for the whole country in which the whole world is essentially following. Unbelievable. I mean, these people have become popes. They've become people who are supposedly speaking, all truth. And everybody needs to not only conform to it, but under severe penalties. Unbelievable. I mean, this happened where the whole Bill of Rights and the Constitution has been completely set aside. Now, of course, those have been set aside for a long, long time. But this is another level of that. Like I said, the Constitution, nobody really adheres to the Constitution. People make arguments. I know many people that say all these arguments, and in the end, might is right. People are going to force their will upon you no matter what words you say. Okay, so, you got to come to grips with that. So anyway, let's look at a couple. I went through with my other video that I never actually finished, or I never uploaded, but we won't have time to go over all of these because I think you get my points, but I wanted to say a couple of them here. So here's just this example that he brings. Statistics show that more people die in hospital than at home. Also, there's a strong association between dying and being in a bed. He says, the nonsense of such associations is apparent. No one would advocate avoiding a hospital or a bed to prolong life. These might seem like extreme examples, but the same sort of errors of logic sometimes pass unrecognized in medical literature. Well, it's actually quite interesting because a lot of people are avoiding going to a hospital so they don't get sick, because you can very much, and to save their lives, or they avoid getting tested so they don't get put on some list. Oh, you've had coronavirus. Oh boy, you're somebody to watch, or you're somebody to pay particular attention to now and track. Anyway, the point is, these associations are these statistical based upon statistics. And while that's a very, when you're showing a fallacy, you use a very obvious one for people to identify and classify. So a biased sample, problems with the sample. A sample is considered unbiased when it truly represents the target population. A frequent source of error in statistical conclusions is a biased sample. This can happen even when the selection is random, or even when random allocation is made in experimental studies. A large sample tends to magnify these errors rather than to control them. And he goes into that. We don't have time to get into it. Inadequate size of the sample, non-response, incomparable groups, differential definitions, differential compliance, improper denominator, mixing of distinct groups. All right, so I'm just going to cover some of these other ones. Errors in representation of findings, misuse of percentages. Percentages can mislead if conclusions are A, based on small n, or B, based on inappropriate total. If 2 patients out of 5, right, 2 patients out of 5 respond to a surgery, it is incorrect to say that the response, is it incorrect to say the response rate is 40%? In another group of 5, if 3 respond, the rate jumps to 60%. A difference of 20% looks like a substantial gain, but in fact the difference is just 1 patient. This can always occur due to sample fluctuation. Thus, percentage based on small n can mislead. So sampling is very important. Misuse of means, misuse of graphs. Some fallacies can occur due to inadequate choice of scale in a graph. This is what we see, this is what we saw on the Johns Hopkins. The graphing gave a misleading impression to people, and that's where the way you scale it can really affect things. Anyway, a steep slope can be represented as mild or vice versa. Similarly, a wide scatter may be shown as compact. So actually, when you see the graphing of the dots, when you look at the whole world map, it looks all red. And then you get down into it, and there's these little dots representing, so it actually gives you a different impression. That shows you an example right there. What is the impression you get when you're expanded that? Wow, those dots are really big. But then when you get down to it, they're smaller. And again, when you actually look at from last year the numbers, and you say, well, what is really the difference here? And then you have to scratch your head and say, I don't know. So let's see. Also, means in different groups or means over time can be shown without corresponding SDs. They can be shown to indicate a trend that does not really exist or is not statistically significant. And that's where blowing something up that's nothing at all. And that's actually an example of that. It may seem like a small point, but really, when we get to the second part of this video with Tom Cohen, we'll talk about this, is really what is happening, what are they actually measuring? It's actually something that is not relevant. It's basically creating a justification for their numbering system that is not really corresponding to a cause and effect relationship. And so sampling, again, but not relevant sampling. So again, it's the narrative. So it's what you go into with. So this whole year, we've seen example where you have, my last video where we had the divide and conquer concept, the right and the left, which are really the same. But you had this narrative. One sees red and one sees blue. Or one sees only evil of the other. And everybody twists everybody else's actions because they're going into it with a certain color glasses. And that's all they see. So the narrative dictates everything. Just like this. Right after the events of this collapse on this picture right here, we saw the metal frame, the metal column standing up 700 feet. Right, I could show you the pictures in this book. Somewhere in there they have the picture, many pictures in this book. We saw that thousands of times. But the narrative that we went into it with was something different than what actually happened. So we saw these metal, 700 feet tall, start to tip over and turn into dust. They didn't go boom on the ground. They went like this, and by the time they got at this angle, they just they just dustified. Because the narrative that we went into this with was that couldn't even happen. That's not possible. So even though we saw it again and again and again, it was the greatest David Copperfield type of moment of all, where it just vanished. And the bomb theory that bombs blew it up can't correspond with that. There's no bombs going up, blowing metal pieces here and there. It was just dust. And so this is where the example where we had in the first 9/11, this is being the second one, the narrative dictating what we perceive to be happening. So really, statistically, relating to statistics, the sampling, if our narrative is we're looking for a certain sample in a certain context, and that context is actually irrelevant, but we're telling you, because we're the experts, we've determined that this condition, this circumstance, and this sampling is relevant. And you just have to believe it. You have to trust us. Why? Says who? Like, what way can you prove this to be empirically verified? Because you're part of the establishment. That makes it true. That's what's happening here. But we have medical doctors who are calling that out and saying, wait a second. Like he says in this video, later on, he'll say, in 1984, when he graduated, after all these years, this whole AIDS thing came out, and he said, he turns and he says to his friends, like, so who changed the rules? We just went through all these years being taught that you have to go through this to make this kind of conclusion, but suddenly it doesn't apply anymore. It's like, well, what was the point that we spent all this money to be told all this, but yet this is not how it's working out in the real world? So again, the whole thing is rigged. Yes, it is true. Money rules the world, and it's, we all agree that crime exists on the lower levels. Come on, are we naive enough to think that it doesn't exist at all levels? Oh well, Nazi Germany was so evil and that could never happen again, or the same kinds of things have happened throughout history, people. Power corrupts, and it doesn't have to, we don't have to have government engaging in that. And I'm not talking about every person knowingly part of something, but I am talking about people who are actually telling you this is what we're going to do, and that's actually what has happened. We can see this for hundreds, thousands of years, this kind of thing happening again and again and again. And you kind of get what you deserve. As a people, if we don't learn to think for ourselves, then you're going to have people take advantage of you. And that's just kind of natural law. You're going to get, you're going to reap what you sow. And if you sow absolute trust in somebody, they're going to take advantage of you, more or less, because most people are bad. No, most people are not good. Most people are bad, even by their own admission. They might not think they're as bad as other people, and that's a big ethical question to get into in philosophy. But most people are irresponsible and have not lived the way they ought to have lived and not being honest about their conclusions about things in life. So they are easily people that can be manipulated. And this is what happens throughout history. All right, so incomplete reporting. All reports should state not only the truth, but the whole truth. There's a growing concern in the medical fraternity that part of the information in reports is sometimes intentionally suppressed and sometimes unknowingly missed. If so, the reader gets a biased picture. This is easily illustrated by the bias of many medical journals for reporting of positive findings and ignoring negative reports. So this is one of the biggest points that we're generally familiar with, is this positive sampling reporting. And here's something that's far more controversial than the more obvious examples where people, like the sampling that was done to justify cigarette smoking, is a lot more obvious for everybody to agree with. Yeah, there's really nothing good about smoking and we should never have done it. But that was then, and we were, I guess, completely ignorant people back then. We had no choice but to believe it. It was, how could they have done it? Those bad people, our grandparents, how could they have actually been so misled? But the same things are happening right now. And I'll give you an example that is a lot more controversial. I'll probably get some of you upset by saying this, but with coffee and chocolate. Oh, well, there's good things, antioxidants and chocolate. And so this is positive sampling, right? So all the focus on, what coffee can do for you and, whatever, but the negative sides outweigh the positive. And that's where, are you doing a proper sampling, complete reporting? Are you looking at the whole thing and evaluating whether this substance should be consumed or not? And I'm not getting into those two particularly, but this is where we see is a huge industry, and they're promoting a lopsided view of, benefits outweighing or just even ignoring the negative things that come along with it. So a very serious problem is reporting only that part of the study that supports a particular hypothesis. The other parts are suppressed. An example is a series of studies on carcinogenic effects of asbestos. According to an analysis of different studies, deliberate attempts were made by the industry to suppress information on the carcinogenicity of asbestos that affected millions of workers. The same thing happened in the sugar industry. The same things happen with the cigarettes. And the list goes on and on and on with all these pharmaceuticals, of course, all these lawsuits and everything. That's why, what do we see right now? Blanket immunity. Okay, you can do this testing, because we've got to do it. We have to suspend all the normal cautions and laws because we're in an emergency. An emergency, everything is gone. Everything goes. It doesn't matter anymore because emergency justifies it all. And so this is where all these sweeping things are done right now that is too much to keep track of. There's way too many things happening for anybody to keep track of right now. Like this big bill that went through 1,000+ pages. Did anybody read it? Just like the Patriot Act went through without anybody ever reading it. Unbelievable. And guess what? Nobody took that away. Nobody got rid of those parts that should never have been in there. So this is what happens again and again. They create problem reaction solution. They want a particular solution, so they create a problem which they have a predictable reaction to, so that they can provide the solution. And again, the example is you have a windshield business that replaces windshields, and you get some kids down the road to throw rocks over, little tiny rocks over the bypass or the overpass, and start breaking people's windshields or cracking them at night, and then they go and they replace the windshield in the business. You get more business out of it. Or a tire replace shop, a tire station, put nails on the road down the road. And so you pop your tire, oh, well, I need to change my tire. Oh, great, it's great. Problem, reaction, solution, right? So you create a medical problem, you put aluminum particulates in the air, you put, you create all these things in the water, in the air, which creates a medical problem, and then you can make millions, billions, and trillions off of addressing those people, and then of course you get rich. And that's exactly what's happening in an industry of illness. Instead of getting people to be healthy and living a simple life. Anyway, I went on to different subjects. Inadequate analysis. Among the most common sources of fallacy is a database conclusion is the use of inappropriate method of analysis. Ignoring reality is one example. Most statistical methods take a simplified view of the complex biological process. Because computers are available for intricate calculations, the statistical need to simplify is not as great now as it used to be in the pre-computer era. But simplification is required for easy comprehension. This should not be done to the extent that it could distort the essential features of a biological process. And again, this is the case exactly as Dr. Cohen is going to mention, where you have an oversimplification. You have symptoms, therefore you have this Osama, let's just put Osama bin Laden in there. Yeah, because he, was for years the source of every problem everybody had in this world, right? He was behind every tree. I mean, there's strong indication that he was dead 5 years before 9/11. But yet, there he was, everywhere, creating havoc upon the country in a cave, halfway around the world. Here, we have this supposed enemy we're at war with, that we've oversimplified what is actually happening. We as the public have no evidence, not even any evidence. We certainly have no proof, but we have no evidence presented to us that we can have any kind of confidence that this is not an oversimplification of multiple factors. So now here's a key point here. So this is where I hear all the time, everywhere I go, almost everybody I talk to, unless they're a reasonable doctor or somebody who can think for themselves in a way where, and they're healthy, and they're really healthy, not like everybody says they're healthy. Somebody who says, people will say to the opposite. They'll say, I got sick, and they're thinking it's because of one factor. What caused you to be sick? What was it? Was it a virus? Was it, instead of looking at it like the camel that has all the straw on its back, and one straw broke the camel's back, not by itself, but because that was it. The immune system was broken down and so compromised in so many ways. It's amazing that you didn't get sick sooner, that you didn't collapse sooner. And so what I'm getting at is people don't look at it realistically. Our water is very bad in many different ways. And this book is all about that. Again, cancer and the new biology of water, even the structuring of water, but all the stuff in the water, all the stuff in the air, all the electromagnetism, all the bad food that we consume, and what have you. The stress, financial stress, all these things are affecting our well-being, right? All the unnatural lives that we're living, all that extent is adding up. And so it's not some little thing. We're not patching up this one little cause that affects your well-being. There's many causes. And so the essential features are including the whole picture. What are all the other factors? And like he says in the end of this video, when we consider, these effects of this massive pollution in relation to turning on the 5G, and all of a sudden this happening, boom, are we not even taking that seriously when all these experts, admitted experts, publishing in journals for decades, warning, and yet do we hear any mention of, it's a conspiracy theory? It's not. It's published based upon scientific fact, admitted upon their own standards is what I'm talking about. Even at their own level of argumentation, this is considered beyond reasonable doubt. And yet no consideration whatsoever. It's a conspiracy theory. It's ridiculous. But again, apart from that, we have to look at health is not a simple matter. Our bodies are very complex. And we live in a very toxic world, right? So it's not so easy just to say, well, what caused you to be ill? Oh, well, I got the flu. As if, you can live. Well, give credit here. What's interesting, this is where the contradiction comes in. Notice that they admit this partially by saying those who have a compromised immune system, quote unquote, will experience this more likely, which older people will tend to have that more frequently. So, what is a compromised immune system? They're talking about a chronic situation. They're talking about a severe and chronic compromised immune system. Well, at least they're admitting that it's not just this little thing that may or may not exist that is causing you to be ill. They're at least pointing the way to say, hey, look, part of the fault is other factors, right? But it's far more than the amount, in other words, they're not about prevention. They're not seriously focused on prevention and really solving these problems, because all these experts are making their jobs exist because of the nature of this problem. If people were healthy, they would be out of work, right? And that's the point that you have to realize, is there's a conflict of interest in these people. In other words, trusting them, there's a conflict of interest in trusting them, because they make a lot of money, these people. Millions of dollars. Some of them making billions of dollars off of this industry. And they're looked on as the experts. I mean, it's unbelievable. But anyway, the point is that I was getting at there was the oversimplification of the problem and basically saying, you know, you have this invader. It's like a devil. It's like a Pac-Man situation where this guy is coming at you and he invades your body, and that's the cause of your symptoms. That's the cause of your sickness. And you've got something now. And before you had that, he was a healthy man. Couldn't understand it. How could it just happen to him? But you start to look at this guy. Was he healthy? Well, he was an average guy showing no symptoms. But you know, if you look at his lifestyle, he wasn't eating real food. Real food is food that doesn't have the toxins in it and poison, GMO and all that stuff. Real food is nutritious. People aren't even eating real food most of the time. Oh, he's under severe radiation in his environment. Oh, he's filled with all sorts of toxins from the air, from his water, what have you. No, this isn't a healthy person. There's almost nobody that's really healthy. You know, we all have compromised immune systems, more or less, except for some people who have really got this all down. And our culture hasn't been preparing people to be that way proactively. No. And the Christians should be most ashamed because their bodies are supposed to be the temple of the Holy Spirit, honoring God with their bodies. And instead, they don't really care. You know, so they're not real Christians. If you don't care about your body, you're not a real Christian. Sorry. You know, and it's a shame. The point is, oversimplifying health. I hear it all the time. I hear people tell me all the time, oh, I'm healthy. Yeah. And after 5 minutes, they're like, oh, wow. You don't have a clue. You know, like, I mean, I remember when I became a Christian, I just immediately, you know, knew I needed to do everything that I know is right and to be pure. And I remember coming to the realization that my whole life was wrong. Everything about it. My physical life was all wrong too. And it was a long process, and it's still ongoing, learning all these things because our culture is so backwards, unnatural. I grew up in the concrete jungle, you know, and that's why people need to get out of that concrete jungle while they can. Anyway, ignoring reality, looking for linearity. Now this is something related to the free energy subject that we talk about. Exactly the same as in the free energy world, and free energy processes, which are non-linear processes, and they are, you know, really the exception of the rule or the norm of what people are used to. So the same thing that applies to a free energy device usually has a non-linear experience, which most people are not used to, so they think is impossible. In the same way, looking in the medical world, when you're looking for a linear relationship or oversimplistic relationship, we were just talking about, then you're going to be deceived. And he said, there's no doubt that hardly any relationship in medicine is linear. Yet linear relationship is the most commonly studied form of relationship in health and medicine. This simplification seems to work fairly well in many situations, but can destroy an otherwise very clear relationship in others. So it doesn't matter what the example is, it's just a matter of obvious fact. So, yeah, in the biological world, just as in the physics world, things are overlooked because it's not the norm. Oh, you're not normal. Well, there's a new normal coming, people. So get used to the changes that are coming. Okay, misinterpretation. Misinterpretation of statistical results. Results mostly occur. Oh, so let me read that again. Misinterpretation of statistical results mostly occurs due to failure to comprehend them in their totality and inability to juxtapose them with the realities of the situation. This can happen either because of the limited knowledge of many medical professionals about statistical concepts, or because of inadequate understanding of the medical issues by the statisticians associated with medical projects. So you can have these results. Okay, we found this RNA, this viral sequence in the blood of in this sampling. Therefore, you've got coronavirus, because we've determined that this particular sequence means you have it. But there's a little bit more detail than that. And that's what he gets into, as you'll see at the end of this video here. If I don't make it into 2 videos now. Correlation versus cause-effect relationship. An association of a correlation in health can arise due to a large number of intervening factors. It is rarely a cause and effect of relationship unless established by carefully designed study that rules out the possibility of a significant role of any confounding factor. Again, these are the points that he stresses more or less in the later point of this video. So again, the narrative, how you define certain things, what you're looking at, and how you're determining cause and effect. What kind of cause and effect? You know. Now, when I did this video a week ago, I went into the whole cause, and there's 6 different types of causes, and there's a difference, and I did say in more detail, which I'll just say briefly, there's a difference between an efficient cause and an instrumental cause, or an occasional cause. Write those down: instrumental cause, efficient cause, occasional cause, and there's yet 3 other ones: formal cause, exemplar cause, and what's the other one? Anyway, those first 3 are important, because if you get them confused, if you cause it's like when we talked about free energy, the avalanche effect. So snapping my fingers causing an avalanche, that's not an efficient cause. This is an instrumental cause. The energy that it took to snap my fingers is not representative in the energy produced by the avalanche. I didn't transfer the energy here and cause all that damage. You know, this was an instrumental cause. So something can be an occasional cause, an instrumental cause, without being the efficient cause. So this is very important philosophy and in any subject matter, to understand your proper causal connections. So I have here one last item. I had typed in, well, I got 2 items here. The fallacy of vaccination from 1911. So over 100 years ago. And he was the president of the Anti-Vaccination League of America. Vaccination is putting of an impure thing into the blood, a virus or poison, often resulting in serious evil effects. In vogue for more than 100 years, it has been received by most persons without question. Yet a time is passing when people will accept a medical
Yet the time is passing when people will accept a medical dogma on blind faith. They now demand to know something about the practices to which they are called to submit. And most insistent of all should be the demand to know something of a practice which, like vaccination, involves the risk of disease and of possible death. Anyway, he goes into it. It's quite interesting to look at. It was just something that I pulled up and noticing from way back. So there's always been people on this right from the beginning. And but now we've got a really good book here that is mentioned by one of the references by Tom Cohen here. And this book is Virus Mayhem, I think it is called. I just have about the book here. Virus Mania, yeah. Okay, so the central claim, okay, let's see here. About this book, a daily scan through the newspapers and TV news gives the impression that the entire world is constantly invaded by a new horrible virus epidemics. The latest headlines feature the human HPV alleged to cause cervical cancer and the avian flu virus, H5N1. The public is also continually terrorized by the reports of SARS, BSE, hepatitis C, AIDS, Ebola, and polio. However, this virus mayhem ignores very basic scientific facts. The existence, the pathogenesis, and the deadly effects of these agents have never been proven. Again, prove it. Prove it. Show me empirical evidence that I could actually physically see. There's actual accountability that we can actually verify this. And even theoretically prove. In other words, show me how your theory even works, because it's contradictory. Anyway, let me read what he says instead of adding my own words. The medical establishment and its loyal media claim that this evidence has been produced. But these claims are highly suspect because modern medicine has published direct virus proof methods aside and has pushed direct virus proof methods aside and uses dubious indirect tools to prove the existence of viruses, such as antibody tests and the polymerase chain reaction PCR. Very small print here, sorry. So the authors show that these alleged contagious viruses are, in fact, particles produced by the cells themselves as a consequence of certain stress factors such as drugs. These particulars are then identified as antibodies or PCR tests and interpreted as epidemic-causing viruses by doctors who have been inoculated for over 100 years by the theory that microbes are deadly and only modern medications and vaccines will protect us from virus pandemics. So it's like, again, this invader that has come, and only a synthetic response is possible. You can't help it. You're a victim. This is a war. This is all this rhetoric. But the whole thing is based upon a fallacy, many fallacies. A central claim of this book is to steer the discussion back to a real scientific debate and put medicine back on the path of impartial analysis of the facts. It will put medical experiments, clinical trials, statistics, and government policies under the microscope, revealing that the people charged with protecting our health and safety have deviated from this path. Along the way, they will analyze all possible causes of illness, such as pharmaceuticals, lifestyle drugs, pesticides, heavy metals, pollution, stress, and processed and sometimes genetically modified foods. Like I said, why aren't those factors, those are implied in saying you have a compromised immune system. Well, how so? Please define that for us, because you're not addressing these factors. I mean, what kind of bogus science are we dealing with here? I mean, really, how immature, how unbelievable. All of these can heavily damage the body of human and animals and even kill them. And precisely, and this is in the journals, creating these very symptoms that we experience. And yet they're not considering the causal relationships there. No, because we only have one enemy. We're only talking about one enemy right now. Forget everything else. We're talking about one enemy, essentially. We have one cure, or maybe we'll have several vaccination cures. That's the only alternative, the only answer here. I mean, wow. And precisely these factors typically prevail where the victims of alleged viruses live and work. To substantiate these claims, the authors cite dozens of highly renowned scientists, among them Nobel Prize laureates. He mentions a whole bunch of them here. This book represents approximately 1,100 prominent scientific references, the majority of which have been published recently. We're not talking about 100 years ago here. We're talking about recently by these top people, acknowledged to be top, like leading experts, according to their expert notations, unbelievable. The topic of this book is of pivotal significance. The pharmaceutical companies and top scientists take in enormous sums of money by attacking germs, and the media boosts its audience ratings and circulates with sensationalized reporting. The coverage of the New York Times and Der Spiegel are significantly analyzed. Individuals pay the highest price of all without getting what they deserve and need most to maintain health. Enlightenment about the real causes and true necessities for prevention and cure of research is to improve people's health most effectively and efficiently, advises John Abramson of Harvard Medical School. The primary purpose of commercially funded clinical research is to maximize financial return on investment, not health. Quote, Harvard Medical School. Virus mania will inform you on how such an environment took root and how to empower yourself for a healthy life. So that's what I want to introduce. This next video, whether I put them together or it's continuing on from this video, it's probably a very long video right now, but I wanted to introduce that. I think that it's pretty interesting. Thomas Cohen, like I said, with him, I would not subscribe to his belief in evolution, macroevolution. He doesn't make it a big point, but that I would differ with him on those points, although he ends the video with, whether you believe in evolution or creation, he ends it like that. And then he also believes in some other things
that I would not agree with his understanding of the spirit world and things along those lines. I would differ with him on, but otherwise, looks very interesting. These concepts, they parallel my studies in energy. His view is not quite, he's not an expert on electromagnetism, and I don't believe the body works with electromagnetism, in that way, but I think what he talks about is very useful, and he's got a very open and humble approach, and that's the way we should be. If we want to be honest people, if we want to be an honest doctor, or whatever we're evaluating in life, those are the attitudes that we need to have. So I encourage everybody to be cautious about making conclusions about anything. Whether you accept some of my my views on what I said, it's not my, I don't really care. My goal is not to get you to believe what I say. My goal is to, hey, get you to think for yourselves, think logically. And in this case, what I'm pointing out is that these particular things that are shoved down our throats, we're being forced to be locked down under, are based upon admittedly contradictions, fundamental contradictions. And that should be quite concerning, because we've seen some of the biggest things happen that the world has ever seen. We've gone through the biggest change in history. James Corbett brought this out in the Corbett Report just the other day, in the Great Depression video, the Greatest Depression, where he showed how, we've had the greatest incline and decline in world history, and as a result of the changes that are taking place, some of the most incredible things are happening right now, some of which we don't realize until we get back out there and things start becoming, we're not going to go back to the same normal. It's going to be a new normal. But anyway, we should at least consider what's the basis for this, and realize exactly what has happened, or realize some of it at least. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy what Tom Cohen is going to say in the next part. And you can find some of that information either in video, or some of his book is online. You can look at Amazon, quite a bit of it, and I think it would be very useful, whatever your beliefs are. So thanks for watching, and the next videos will be on energy. Those of you who want to learn about energy will probably be my videos, but people asked me to share this, so I thought I would. So thanks for watching.